The concrete floor of storage unit 247 was ice cold beneath Marcus's knees as he pried open the final wooden crate. 3 days ago, he'd been sleeping under a bridge with $17 to his name. Now, surrounded by antique furniture and expensive artwork, he was starting to believe his luck had finally turned. Until he found the photographs. Black and white images spilled across the dusty floor, a young woman, beautiful and terrified, bound to a chair. Below them, yellowed newspaper clippings screamed headlines about Rebecca Ashworth's disappearance in 1987, the socialite who vanished without a trace, leaving behind a grieving family and $1 million reward that still stood today. Marcus's hands trembled as he examined the evidence. What no one knew was that he'd spent 15 years as a forensic photographer before addiction destroyed his career and left him on the streets. He recognized staging when he saw it. These weren't random crime scene photos. They were trophies. The dead millionaire who owned this unit wasn't just wealthy, he was a killer. But did Marcus just stumble upon the solution to a cold case, or had he walked into a trap that was 37 years in the making? Marcus forced himself to breathe, his trained eye cataloguing details he wished he could unsee. The woman's positioning, the careful lighting, the deliberate composition, everything screamed professional documentation. He'd taken similar photos for police departments across 3 states, but those had been after the fact, clinical evidence of crimes already committed. These were different. These captured terror in real time. His fingers hesitated over a manila envelope wedged beneath the photos. Inside, he found more than pictures. There were handwritten notes in precise cursive, dates and times meticulously recorded, location coordinates, and at the bottom of the stack, a business card for Harold Blackwood, the unit's deceased owner. Marcus knew that name. Everyone in the city did. Blackwood Industries had built half the downtown skyline. Harold Blackwood had been philanthropy's golden boy, his foundation funding homeless shelters and addiction recovery programs. The same programs Marcus had been too proud to use until it was too late. The irony tasted like bile in his throat. A car door slammed outside, echoing through the storage facility's narrow corridors. Marcus froze, suddenly aware of how exposed he was. The rolling metal door stood wide open, advertising his presence to anyone who might be watching. He'd been so focused on his unexpected windfall that basic caution had evaporated. Footsteps approached, measured and deliberate. Marcus quickly gathered the photographs, shoving them back into their hiding place. His heart hammered against his ribs as he tried to look casual, examining a silver picture frame that probably cost more than most people made in a month. "Quite a haul you got there." The voice belonged to a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed despite the warehouse setting. Her grey hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes held the sharp intelligence of someone accustomed to getting answers. "Just looking through my purchase," Marcus replied carefully. "Won it fair and square at auction." "I'm sure you did." She stepped closer, her heels clicking against the concrete. "I'm Detective Sarah Chen. I was hoping we could talk." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "About what?" "Harold Blackwood. Funny thing about rich men, they make enemies. When they die unexpectedly, we like to make sure we haven't missed anything important." Her gaze swept the unit's contents. Storage units can be treasure troves of information. The envelope of photographs felt like it was burning against Marcus's leg where he'd hastily tucked it. He died of a heart attack, right? That's what the papers said. "Papers say a lot of things." Detective Chen picked up an ornate music box, winding the key with practiced fingers. A melancholy tune began to play. "Doesn't mean they're all true. You find anything interesting in here?" Marcus's forensic training warred with his survival instincts. If he turned over the evidence now, he'd be doing the right thing, but he'd also be walking away from the only real opportunity he'd had in years. The $1 million reward for information about Rebecca Ashworth's disappearance, the chance to buy his way off the streets and maybe, just maybe, buy back some dignity. "Just old furniture and artwork," he said, "nothing that would interest a detective." Chen nodded slowly, but her eyes never left his face. "Well, if you do happen across anything unusual, I hope you'll give me a call." She handed him a business card. Sometimes the most innocent discoveries can be dangerous in the wrong hands. After she left, Marcus sat alone among Harold Blackwood's possessions, the photographs hidden but hardly forgotten. He had two choices: do the right thing and stay homeless, or take the biggest gamble of his life. The music box continued its haunting melody, and in its notes, Marcus heard the echo of decisions that would either save him or destroy him completely. The lock fell away with a satisfying click, and Marcus rolled up the metal door with trembling hands. Dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight as it streamed into the 10 by 12 space, revealing the shadows of his $50 gamble. At first glance, disappointment washed over him. No antique furniture or vintage collectibles. Instead, cardboard boxes lined the walls like silent sentinels, their corners softened by years of neglect. A few pieces of outdated exercise equipment occupied the center, a Bowflex knockoff and a treadmill that had seen better decades. In the far corner, a rolled-up carpet leaned against the wall like a forgotten cigar. Marcus stepped inside, breathing in the stale air that spoke of abandonment. The concrete floor bore rust stains from some long-gone metal shelving, and cobwebs draped the ceiling corners like nature's own crime scene tape. He pulled out his phone's flashlight to illuminate the darker recesses. The first box he opened contained women's clothing from what looked like the early 2000s. Designer labels, but nothing that would fetch much at resale. The second held photo albums and loose pictures, the kind of personal items that always made him feel like an intruder in someone else's life. He flipped through a few pages: family barbecues, birthday parties. A young blonde woman featured prominently in many shots, always smiling, always vibrant. The third box made him pause. Underneath a layer of musty books, his fingers found something unexpected: a manila envelope, thick and yellowed with age. The flap wasn't sealed, just tucked under, as if someone had opened it recently or never properly closed it in the first place. Marcus glanced around the storage facility. A few other winners were examining their own purchases, but no one was paying attention to him. He opened the envelope. The first item was a photograph, but not the kind from the family albums. This one was different, grainier, taken from a distance with what must have been a telephoto lens. It showed the same blonde woman from the other photos, but she wasn't smiling now. She was arguing with someone, a man whose face was partially obscured by shadows. The setting appeared to be a parking garage. Beneath the photo were documents, bank statements showing large irregular deposits, handwritten notes in two different scripts, one neat and feminine, the other hasty and masculine. The feminine writing was mostly dates and times, like appointment entries. The masculine writing was harder to read, but certain words jumped out: payment, silence, and permanent solution. Marcus's pulse quickened as he continued digging. There was a copy of a life insurance policy for $2 million, dated 15 years ago, with the blonde woman, Jennifer Caldwell, as the insured party. The beneficiary was listed as Robert Caldwell, presumably her husband. At the bottom of the envelope, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small cassette tape, the kind used in old answering machines. Someone had written backup on the label in that same hasty masculine handwriting. Marcus sat back on his heels, his mind racing. Jennifer Caldwell. The name tickled something in his memory, a half-remembered news story from years past. A missing person case that had made headlines briefly before fading into the background noise of daily life. He pulled out his phone and searched for her name. The results confirmed his suspicion. Jennifer Caldwell had disappeared 15 years ago after leaving her downtown office job. Her car was found abandoned near the river 3 days later. No body was ever recovered. The case went cold after 6 months of investigation, with police treating it as either suicide or voluntary disappearance. But looking at the contents of this envelope, Marcus was beginning to suspect a third possibility. He photographed each document with his phone, his hands slightly shaky. If this was what it appeared to be, evidence of murder, he was holding something that could reopen a 15-year-old case, something that could put someone very dangerous behind bars. or something that could get him killed if the wrong person discovered he had it. The sound of footsteps echoing through the facility made him quickly stuff everything back into the envelope and slip it under his jacket. A security guard was making his rounds, checking on the new tenants. "Finding anything good?" the guard asked cheerfully as he passed Marcus's unit. "Just the usual junk," Marcus replied, forcing a casual tone. "You know how it is." The guard nodded and continued his patrol. Marcus waited until the footsteps faded before allowing himself to breathe normally again. He needed to get this envelope somewhere safe, somewhere he could examine everything properly without curious eyes watching. He quickly loaded the boxes and exercise equipment into his truck, the envelope burning against his ribs where he'd hidden it. As he drove home, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his $50 gamble had just changed his life forever, though whether for better or worse remained to be seen. The cassette tape felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds against his chest, holding secrets that someone had literally been willing to kill for. The photograph trembled in Marcus's hands as he studied the woman's face more closely. Even in the dim lighting of the storage unit, her features were hauntingly clear: high cheekbones, doe eyes, and a smile that seemed to hold secrets. But it was the distinctive birthmark on her left temple, shaped like a crescent moon, that made his breath catch. He'd seen that face before, not in person but plastered across newspaper headlines and television screens during his childhood. The missing heiress, the vanished fortune, the case that had captivated the nation for months before gradually fading into cold case files. Victoria Ashworth. Marcus fumbled for his phone, his fingers clumsy with adrenaline as he searched for the old news articles. The blue glow illuminated his face as story after story confirmed his suspicions. Victoria Ashworth, heir to a pharmaceutical empire worth over $200 million, had disappeared without a trace in 1987. She was 24 years old, engaged to a prominent attorney, and scheduled to take control of her inheritance on her 25th birthday. She never made it to that birthday. The official investigation had focused on kidnapping, assuming someone had taken her for ransom. But no demands ever came. No body was ever found. After 7 years, she was declared legally dead, and her fortune was distributed among various charities according to her grandfather's will, a will that specifically stated the money could never go to her stepfamily, whom he'd despised. Marcus looked back at the jewelry box. If Victoria was dead, if these were her personal effects, then how had they ended up in a storage unit registered to someone named Robert Chen? The rental agreement was dated 1988, just months after her disappearance, and the payments had been automatically withdrawn from an account for over 3 decades until recently stopping, which explained why the unit had gone to auction. He photographed everything with his phone before carefully examining each item. The jewelry was exquisite, clearly expensive pieces that a wealthy young woman might own. A Cartier watch, still ticking somehow after all these years, a string of pearls that felt substantial and real against his palm, diamond earrings that caught what little light filtered into the unit. But it was a small leather journal, tucked beneath the velvet lining of the jewelry box, that made his heart race. The pages were filled with Victoria's handwriting. He recognized it from samples shown in the old news coverage. Most entries were mundane observations about her daily life, complaints about her stepmother's manipulation, excitement about her upcoming inheritance. Then the entries took a darker turn. March 15, 1987. Richard thinks I don't know about the documents he's been forging. He's wrong. April 2nd, 1987. Found the safety deposit box key hidden in his office. Whatever he's hiding there might be enough to destroy him. April 20th, 1987. I've made copies of everything. If something happens to me, the truth is hidden where only Danny would think to look. The roses remember everything. The final entry was dated April 22nd, 1987, just 2 days before Victoria's disappearance was reported. They know I know. Richard's been asking too many questions about my schedule. I'm scared, but I can't go to the police yet. Not until I have everything I need to prove what they've done to the company, to the people who trusted us. If I disappear, look for Robert. He's the only one I can trust now. Marcus sat back on his heels, his mind reeling. Richard had to be Richard Blackwood, Victoria's stepfather, who had married her mother when Victoria was 16. He'd been questioned during the investigation but had a solid alibi for the night she disappeared. The man had seemed genuinely distraught, even offering a substantial reward for information about her whereabouts. But if Victoria had discovered something damaging about him, if she'd been planning to expose him... The sound of footsteps outside the storage unit made Marcus freeze. He quickly closed the journal and shoved it inside his jacket, then began hastily replacing items in the jewelry box. The footsteps grew closer, echoing off the concrete walls of the storage facility. "Unit 247, a voice said. "Male, authoritative, should be right around here." Marcus's blood turned to ice. He'd closed the roll-up door when he'd arrived, but hadn't bothered to lock it since he was planning to load everything into his truck anyway. Now he realized how vulnerable that made him. The footsteps stopped directly outside his unit. Marcus held his breath. Crouched behind a stack of boxes, the jewelry box clutched against his chest. Through the thin metal door, he could hear hushed conversation between at least two people, though he couldn't make out the words. A hand gripped the door handle. In that moment, Marcus understood that his $50 gamble had just become a life-or-death situation. Someone else knew what was in this storage unit. Someone who had been watching, waiting for the right moment to claim what Victoria Ashworth had hidden decades ago. The door began to rise with a metallic screech that sounded like a death knell. The manila folder felt heavier than it should have as Marcus sat at his kitchen table. The contents spread before him like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle he wasn't sure he wanted to complete. The photographs stared back at him, black and white images of a woman who couldn't have been older than 25, her dark hair styled in the fashion of the early 80s. In some shots she was laughing, in others she gazed thoughtfully off camera. There was something hauntingly familiar about her face, though Marcus couldn't place where he might have seen it before. The newspaper clippings told a different story. "Local woman missing," read one headline dated September 15, 1983. "Search continues for Vanessa Hartwell," proclaimed another from 2 weeks later. Marcus studied the grainy newspaper photo. Definitely the same woman from the color photographs, though the black and white print made her seem almost ghostly. According to the articles, Vanessa Hartwell had been a real estate agent who disappeared after showing a property on the outskirts of town. Her car was found 3 days later in a shopping center parking lot, keys still in the ignition, purse untouched. The police had questioned several suspects, including her ex-boyfriend and a client who had been acting strangely, but no arrests were ever made. After 6 months, the case went cold. Marcus picked up the leather journal again, flipping through pages of increasingly erratic handwriting. Most entries were mundane, grocery lists, appointment reminders, thoughts about work. But as he progressed through the months leading up to September 1983, the tone shifted dramatically. "He's been following me again," read one entry dated August 20th. "I saw the same car outside the office yesterday and today. Dark blue sedan, couldn't make out the license plate. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but after what happened with the Riverside property, I can't shake this feeling." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. What had happened with the Riverside property? He found his answer several pages later. "The client who looked at the Riverside house last week keeps calling. Not about the property. He asks strange questions about my schedule, whether I live alone, if I have security at my apartment. When I told him the house sold to another buyer, he got angry, really angry. Said he'd been watching that house for months and knew it was perfect." Perfect for what? I didn't ask. I should report this to the police, but what would I say? That a client gives me the creeps? The final entry was dated September 14th, 1983, 1 day before she was reported missing. "I agreed to show him another property tomorrow. I know I shouldn't, but he apologized for his behavior and sounded genuinely interested in buying. He specifically requested the old Miller farmhouse on Route 9. I've been trying to sell that place for 2 years. The commission would really help right now. I'm meeting him there at 4 p.m. If anything feels wrong, I'm leaving immediately." Marcus set the journal down with trembling hands. The woman had documented her own death, and he was holding the evidence 40 years later. But why had these items been in a storage unit? Who had been paying to keep this secret hidden away? He examined the business cards again. Several were for Hartwell Realty, presumably Vanessa's own company. But there were others: contractors, inspectors, mortgage brokers. One card was different from the rest, slightly yellowed and bearing only a name and phone number: Detective Ray Morrison, Eastfield Police Department. Marcus grabbed his phone and dialed directory assistance. After a brief hold, the operator confirmed that Detective Morrison had retired from the Eastfield PD in 2010, but was still listed in the local phone book. The phone rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. Morrison. Detective Morrison? My name is Marcus Webb. I was wondering if you might remember a case from 1983. Vanessa Hartwell? The silence stretched so long that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Morrison spoke. Where did you hear that name? I found some materials, documents. I think they might be related to her disappearance. What kind of documents? Marcus hesitated. How much should he reveal? A journal, some photographs, newspaper clippings about the case. Another pause. Mr. Webb, I'm going to ask you to do something, and I need you to listen carefully. Don't talk to anyone else about this. Don't show those materials to anyone. Can you bring them to me tonight? Tonight? It's already past 8 o'clock. This can't wait. The Hartwell case, there were complications back then. People who didn't want it solved. If you've really found evidence, you could be in danger. Marcus felt the room grow cold despite the heating being on. What kind of danger? The kind that got Vanessa Hartwell killed. Meet me at Denny's on Route 4 in 1 hour. Come alone and bring everything you found. The line went dead, leaving Marcus staring at his phone and wondering what he had stumbled into. The rain drummed against Marcus's apartment windows as he sat hunched over his laptop, the manila envelope's contents spread across his coffee table like pieces of a deadly puzzle. He'd been staring at the photographs for 2 hours, and Detective Sarah Chen's lifeless eyes seemed to bore into his soul from every angle. His fingers trembled as he typed her name into the search engine for the 10th time, hoping he'd missed something in his previous searches. The results remained frustratingly sparse: a brief obituary from the Tribune, a small article about her disappearance, and nothing more. It was as if someone had systematically scrubbed her existence from the public record. Marcus leaned back, rubbing his eyes. The smart thing would be to take everything to the police, let them handle it. But the letter's ominous warning about law enforcement corruption made him hesitate. If dirty cops were involved 30 years ago, who's to say they weren't still around? His phone buzzed. A text from his sister Amy. Haven't heard from you in days. Everything okay? He stared at the message, fingers poised over the keyboard. How could he explain that he'd stumbled into something that made every shadow in his apartment feel threatening? That he'd spent the last hour checking and rechecking his door locks? Just busy with auction stuff. Talk soon. The lie came easily, but it left a bitter taste in his mouth. Amy was the only family he had left, and here he was, potentially putting himself in danger over a decades-old crime. For what? Money? Justice? He wasn't even sure anymore. Marcus picked up the letter again, studying the handwriting. The author claimed to have evidence of police involvement in Chen's murder, evidence hidden somewhere safe. But where? And who was this mysterious informant? A loud thump from the hallway made him freeze. Probably just his neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez, dragging her laundry to the machines, but every sound felt amplified in his current state of paranoia. He gathered the photographs into a neat stack, his hands moving with newfound purpose. The storage unit. There had to be more evidence there. 20 minutes later, Marcus stood before Unit 47, with a heavy-duty flashlight and a crowbar he'd borrowed from the building's maintenance closet. The facility was nearly empty at this hour, just the occasional security patrol that wouldn't return for another 30 minutes according to his observation of their routine. He'd already moved the obvious items to his apartment, but now he needed to search more systematically. The metal door creaked open, and his flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the remaining furniture and boxes he'd left behind. Marcus started with the dresser, pulling out each drawer completely, feeling along the undersides and backs for anything taped or hidden. Nothing. The desk yielded similar results, though he did find an old appointment book wedged behind one of the drawers. The entries were mostly mundane, doctor appointments, social gatherings, but several pages had been carefully torn out. Growing frustrated, he moved to the boxes in the back corner. Most contained old clothes and household items, but the third box made him pause. Beneath layers of moth-eaten sweaters, his fingers found something hard and rectangular. A safety deposit box key, taped to the bottom of the container. His heart pounded as he held the small brass key up to his flashlight. No identifying numbers or bank names, just a worn piece of metal that could unlock answers to questions that had haunted someone enough to kill for. But which bank? Chicago had hundreds of them, and that was assuming the box was even local. Without more information, the key was useless. Marcus was about to give up when he noticed something odd about one of the cardboard boxes. The bottom seemed thicker than it should be. Closer inspection revealed a false bottom, cleverly constructed to hide a thin space beneath. Inside, he found a single sheet of paper with an address written in the same handwriting as the letter First National Bank of Chicago, 427 S. LaSalle Street, Box 247. The same bank where Chen had supposedly been investigating financial irregularities before her death. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Someone had planned this carefully, creating a trail of breadcrumbs that led directly to evidence of police corruption and murder. But why store it in a public storage unit? And why had it taken 30 years for someone to find it? Unless finding it hadn't been an accident. The thought hit him like a physical blow. What if the storage unit's previous owner had died recently? What if someone was counting on an innocent buyer to stumble across the evidence and do exactly what Marcus was doing now? As if summoned by his paranoid thoughts, footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. Slow, deliberate steps that didn't match the hurried pace of the security guards he'd observed. Marcus quickly pocketed the key and address, switched off his flashlight, and pressed himself against the wall beside the door opening. The footsteps grew closer, pausing just outside his unit. In the darkness, he held his breath and waited. Marcus stared at the newspaper clipping until his eyes burned. The yellowed paper crackled between his trembling fingers as he read the headline for the third time. Local business owner missing, foul play suspected. Below it, a grainy photograph showed a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a gentle smile, the same face that stared back at him from the driver's license he'd found earlier. Robert Chen had vanished on October 15, 1987, leaving behind a successful restaurant and a family who never stopped searching for answers. The article mentioned his wife Linda and 2 young children. Marcus calculated quickly. Those children would be adults now, probably with families of their own, still wondering what happened to their father. The storage unit suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead and reached for the next item in the box, a leather-bound appointment book. The entries stopped abruptly on October 14, 1987. The final notation read, "Meeting with JV, 8 p.m., Warehouse District." JV Marcus flipped through his mental Rolodex of local names, but came up empty. He photographed the page with his phone, then continued excavating the box's contents. Beneath the appointment book lay a manila envelope sealed with brittle tape. Inside, he found a collection of photographs that made his stomach clench. The images showed Robert Chen meeting with various men in dimly lit locations. Some appeared to be restaurants or bars. Others looked like parking garages or industrial areas. In several photos, briefcases changed hands. Marcus recognized none of the faces, but one man appeared in multiple shots, a tall figure with distinctive silver hair and a prominent scar running down his left cheek. At the bottom of the envelope, Marcus discovered something that made his blood run cold, a handwritten note in Robert Chen's careful script. Insurance policy. If anything happens to me, these photos tell the whole story. JV isn't who he claims to be. The restaurant was just a front. They're using it to launder money from the docks. And when I threatened to expose them, The note ended mid-sentence, as if Robert had been interrupted. Marcus set the paper down and rubbed his temples. He was holding evidence of what appeared to be a money laundering operation that had gotten Robert Chen killed. But who was JV, and why had these items ended up in a storage unit instead of with the police? A sudden noise from outside the unit made Marcus freeze. Footsteps echoed through the facility's corridors, growing closer. He quickly stuffed the photographs and documents back into their containers, his heart hammering against his ribs. The footsteps paused directly outside his unit. "You sure this is the right one?" a gruff voice asked. "Unit 247. This is it." The second voice was younger, with a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. Marcus killed his flashlight and crouched behind a stack of boxes, barely breathing. Through the gap under the roll-up door, he could see 2 pairs of shoes. One man wore expensive leather loafers, the other sported worn work boots. "Doesn't look like anyone's been here," the younger voice said. "Door's still locked. Check the logbook. See who bought it at auction." Marcus's chest tightened. These men knew about the auction. They were looking for exactly what he'd found. His phone buzzed with a text message, and though the sound was barely audible, it seemed to echo like a gunshot in the silence. The footsteps stopped. "You hear that? Probably just settling. These old buildings make noise." Marcus held his breath, clutching his phone. Another text arrived, but he'd switched it to silent just in time. Sweat dripped down his back as he remained motionless, listening to the men circle the unit. "We need to find out who bought this stuff," the older voice said. "Boss isn't going to wait much longer. Chen's been dead 36 years, but his insurance policy is still out there somewhere. Maybe whoever bought it just wanted the furniture. Probably threw away all the old papers." "You better hope so. Because if those photos surface now, especially with the harbor project moving forward, it's going to bring down some very important people." The footsteps retreated, growing fainter until Marcus could no longer hear them. He waited another 10 minutes before moving, his muscles cramped from crouching. When he finally stood, his legs felt like rubber. Marcus quickly gathered the most important items: the photographs, the appointment book, and Robert's unfinished note. He couldn't take everything tonight, but he needed these pieces safe. As he prepared to leave, he realized the terrible truth. Robert Chen hadn't just been murdered to silence him. He'd been killed to protect something much bigger, something that apparently still mattered enough to send men hunting through storage facilities in the dead of night. And now Marcus was caught in the middle of it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the storage facility parking lot as Marcus sat in his truck, staring at the manila envelope that could change everything. He'd barely slept, his mind racing through possibilities and dangers in equal measure. The smart thing would be to walk away, to pretend he'd never found anything more interesting than moth-eaten sweaters and broken picture frames. But $50,000 wasn't walking away money. His phone buzzed. Sarah's name lit up the screen. "You sound terrible," she said when he answered. "Late night researching antiques?" "Something like that." Marcus rubbed his eyes, tasting the staleness of too much coffee and too little sleep. "Sarah, hypothetically speaking, what would you do if you found something that could be worth a lot of money, but it might also be dangerous?" A pause. "That's oddly specific for a hypothetical question. Just humor me." "Well, I'd probably ask myself if I could live with whatever consequences came from both choices. Sometimes the safe path isn't really safer in the long run." Her voice softened. "Marcus, what's really going on? You've been acting strange since yesterday." He wanted to tell her everything. Sarah had been his anchor through the divorce, the job loss, the slow slide into financial desperation that had driven him to storage auctions in the first place. But the photograph of Robert Kellerman's mutilated body flashed through his mind, and he couldn't risk pulling her into this nightmare. "Nothing I can't handle," he lied. "Listen, I need to run some errands today. Can we rain-check dinner?" After hanging up, Marcus felt the familiar weight of isolation settling over him. He'd been making excuses and keeping secrets for months now, too proud to admit how badly he was struggling. Now he had a secret that could actually kill him. The storage facility was quiet this early, most units still locked tight against the morning light. Marcus parked near Unit 247 and sat for a moment, watching for any signs he was being observed. A maintenance worker pushed a cart between the buildings. A woman in yoga clothes loaded boxes into her SUV. Everything looked normal, but normal was exactly what someone watching him would try to project. Inside the unit, surrounded by Clara Henley's carefully preserved life, Marcus spread the photographs across a dusty card table. In daylight, they seemed even more damning. The timestamps showed a sequence of events that had unfolded over several hours on October 15, 1987. Robert Kellerman, arriving at what looked like a warehouse, the same warehouse empty except for several men Marcus didn't recognize. Then the violence. Clara had documented a murder with the methodical precision of a crime scene photographer. He picked up the camera, a professional-grade Nikon that would have been expensive in its day. The film, advance lever, still moved smoothly, but the camera was empty. Had Clara developed the film herself, or had she trusted someone else with these explosive images? The thought of a photolab technician stumbling across these pictures 35 years ago made Marcus's stomach clench. A sound outside made him freeze. Footsteps on gravel, moving too deliberately to be casual. Marcus quickly gathered the photographs and stuffed them back into the envelope, his heart hammering as the footsteps grew closer. "Hello? Anyone in there?" The voice belonged to Dave Kowalski, the facility manager. Marcus forced himself to breathe normally before stepping outside. "Morning, Dave. Just sorting through some items." Dave was a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes who took his security responsibilities seriously. "Funny thing," he said, studying Marcus's face. "Had a guy come by yesterday asking about this unit, wanted to know who bought it, what was inside. Offered me $200 for the information. What did you tell him?" "Same thing I tell everyone who asks questions they shouldn't. Nothing." Dave stepped closer, but it got me thinking. This unit sat here for decades without anyone showing interest. Now suddenly everyone wants to know about it. Makes a man wonder what's so special about Clara Henley's old junk. Marcus felt sweat gathering under his collar despite the cool morning air. "Did he give you a name?" "Called himself Johnson. Generic-looking guy, maybe 50, dressed like he sold insurance. But his eyes..." Dave shook his head. "His eyes weren't insurance salesman eyes, if you know what I mean. What kind of eyes were they?" "The kind that have seen things, done things." Dave's expression grew serious. "Look, Marcus, I've known you for over a year now. You're a good guy who pays his bills and doesn't cause trouble, so I'm going to give you some free advice. Whatever you found in there, whatever's got Mr. Johnson so interested, maybe it's not worth the headache." As Dave walked away, Marcus realized his hands were shaking. Johnson, if that was even his real name, had moved fast, too fast for coincidence. Someone had been watching the storage facility, waiting to see who would claim Clara Henley's secrets. The envelope felt heavier now, weighted with the certainty that he was no longer just a man who'd stumbled onto evidence of an old crime. He was a target. Marcus's hands trembled as he spread the photographs across his kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light. Each black and white image told a piece of the story he'd been trying to reconstruct. The woman, Sarah Chen, according to the driver's license he'd found, appeared in several shots, always with the same man. Tall, distinguished, wearing expensive suits that screamed money and power even through the grainy film. The photos progressed like a twisted timeline. First, romantic dinners in upscale restaurants. Then heated arguments captured through restaurant windows. Finally, the disturbing images that made his stomach churn, Sarah's face bruised, her lips split, fear evident in her eyes even from decades past. Marcus picked up the magnifying glass he'd borrowed from his neighbor and examined the clearest photo of the man. Something about the face nagged at him, the strong jawline, the piercing eyes, the way he carried himself with absolute authority. He'd seen this face before, but where? His laptop hummed to life as he began searching local newspapers from the 1980s. Sarah Chen's name yielded nothing, but he expanded his search to missing persons reports from that era. After 2 hours of scrolling through digitized archives, he found it. A small article buried on page 6 of the Metro section. Local woman reported missing. The article was brief, clinical. Sarah Chen, 28, a secretary at Blackwood Development Corporation, had failed to show up for work for 3 consecutive days. Police found no signs of struggle at her apartment. The case went cold within weeks. Blackwood Development Corporation. Marcus's blood ran cold as recognition hit him like a freight train. He'd seen that name recently splashed across billboards and newspaper headlines. The company had grown into one of the city's largest real estate empires, and its founder— Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up the company's website. There he was, older now, but unmistakably the same man from the photographs. Richard Blackwood, CEO and founder, estimated net worth in the hundreds of millions. The man who likely murdered Sarah Chen. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. Sarah had worked for Blackwood in the early days of his company. The photos suggested they'd had an affair that turned violent. When she became a liability or threatened to expose him, he'd eliminated the problem. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He held evidence of a murder committed by one of the most powerful men in the city. The smart play would be to take everything to the police and let them handle it. But the cynical part of him knew how this would play out. Blackwood's army of lawyers would bury the evidence in legal challenges. Witnesses would disappear or change their stories. Marcus would become a target with nothing to show for it. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We should talk. Meet me at Riverside Park, East Bench, 1 hour. Come alone." Marcus stared at the message, his mouth going dry. Someone knew he had the evidence, but who? And how? He gathered the photos and documents, stuffing them back into the manila envelope. The smart thing would be to ignore the text, maybe even pack up and leave town for a while. But curiosity had always been his weakness, and whoever sent that message might have answers to questions he hadn't even thought to ask yet. Riverside Park sat empty except for a few joggers and dog walkers enjoying the crisp evening air. Marcus spotted the East Bench immediately. An elderly man in a worn coat sat feeding pigeons from a paper bag. As Marcus approached, the man looked up with tired eyes that held decades of secrets. "You must be Marcus," the man said, patting the bench beside him. "Sit down. We don't have much time. Who are you?" Marcus remained standing, every muscle tense. "My name is Detective Ray Morrison, retired. I worked Sarah Chen's case back in '87. He pulled out a badge, the metal dulled with age. "I've been waiting 35 years for someone to find what you found in that storage unit." Marcus slowly sat down, processing this revelation. "You knew about the evidence?" "I suspected. Sarah called me 2 days before she disappeared. Said she had proof that her boss was involved in some kind of cover-up at a construction site. Workers had died, and the company buried it to avoid liability. She was scared, said she was going to expose everything." Morrison's weathered hands crumpled the empty pigeon food bag. "I told her to bring me whatever she had. She never showed up. Why didn't you pursue it?" Morrison's laugh was bitter. "I tried, but Blackwood had friends in high places. My captain took me off the case. Evidence disappeared from the lockup. I was transferred to traffic duty within a month. The message was clear: back off or face the consequences." A black sedan pulled up to the park's entrance. Morrison tensed, his hand moving instinctively toward where his service weapon once rested. "They found us," he whispered. "Whatever you do, don't let them get that evidence." Marcus's hands trembled as he spread the photographs across his kitchen table under the harsh fluorescent light. The images were grainy, black and white, but clear enough to make his stomach churn. A man in an expensive suit lay crumpled against what looked like a warehouse wall, dark stains spreading across his chest. The timestamp in the corner read November 15th, 1987. He'd found the manila envelope tucked behind the false back of an ornate jewelry box. along with a roll of cash that had turned out to be $20,000 in hundreds. But it was these photographs that made his blood run cold, especially when he recognized the face of the dead man from the newspaper clippings he'd found earlier. Vincent Castellano, the missing heir to a construction empire. Marcus poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and tried to think rationally. Someone had killed Castellano and photographed the aftermath. Someone had kept these pictures for over 30 years, hidden away with enough cash to buy a decent car. The question was why? His phone buzzed. "Sarah, any luck with your treasure hunt?" she asked when he answered. Marcus stared at the photographs. "You could say that. Listen, what do you know about evidence tampering? Hypothetically speaking." "Marcus, what did you find? Just answer the question." There was a pause. "Hypothetically, withholding evidence of a crime is obstruction of justice. Could mean serious jail time, depending on the severity of the crime." "Why?" Before Marcus could answer, his doorbell rang. He froze, bourbon halfway to his lips. Nobody visited him unannounced, ever. "I have to go," he whispered into the phone. "Marcus." He hung up and quickly gathered the photographs, shoving them back into the envelope. The doorbell rang again, followed by a firm knock. "Marcus Webb? My name is Detective Rivera. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. He stuffed the envelope under his couch cushions and tried to compose himself before opening the door. A middle-aged Latina woman in a rumpled pantsuit stood on his doorstep, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "Questions about what?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice steady. "About a storage unit you purchased yesterday, Unit 247 at Sunset Storage." She showed him her badge. "May I come in?" Marcus stepped aside, his mind racing. "How did you know about that?" "We've been monitoring that unit for some time, part of an ongoing investigation." Detective Rivera's gaze swept his living room, taking in every detail. "What exactly did you find in there, Mr. Webb?" "Just old furniture, some books. Nothing valuable." The lie came surprisingly easily. "Why? What kind of investigation?" "The kind that involves people who ask too many questions ending up dead." Her tone was casual, but her meaning was clear. "Mr. Webb, you seem like a decent guy. You work at the community college, keep to yourself, no criminal record. I'd hate to see that change." Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm warning you. There are people who've been looking for the contents of that storage unit for a very long time, people who won't hesitate to kill for what they want." She pulled out a business card and set it on his coffee table. "If you found anything unusual, anything at all, you need to turn it over to me, for your own protection." "And if I haven't found anything unusual?" Detective Rivera smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Then you're one lucky man, Mr. Webb, because the original renter of that unit was found floating in the harbor 3 days ago. Single gunshot to the head, execution style." The room seemed to tilt. Marcus gripped the doorframe to steady himself. "What was his name?" "Tommy Rossetti. Small-time fence with big-time connections. Word is he'd been trying to auction off some very sensitive material." She headed toward the door, then paused. "One more thing, Mr. Webb. That storage facility has security cameras. We know you made 2 trips to that unit yesterday. The second time you brought boxes out, large boxes." Marcus said nothing. "I'll be in touch," she said, and left him standing in his doorway, watching her unmarked sedan disappear down the street. He closed the door and leaned against it, his mind reeling. Tommy Rossetti was dead, murdered, and now the police knew exactly what Marcus had taken from the storage unit. But something about Detective Rivera's visit felt wrong. Real cops didn't usually warn civilians about ongoing investigations. Real cops didn't casually mention that asking questions could get you killed, unless they weren't really trying to solve the case, unless they were trying to cover it up. Marcus pulled the envelope from under the couch cushions and stared at Vincent Castellano's lifeless face. 34 years ago, someone had murdered the heir to a fortune. Someone had photographed the crime scene, and now, decades later, people were still dying to keep that secret buried. The question was, what was Marcus going to do about it? Marcus's hands trembled as he stared at the newspaper clipping dated 3 days after Elizabeth Hartwell's supposed death. The headline screamed, "Mysterious Fire Destroys Hartwell Estate Wing." Below it, a grainy photograph showed flames consuming what the caption identified as the east wing of the family mansion. The article was brief but damning. An electrical fire had gutted the section of the house that contained Elizabeth's private study and bedroom. No bodies were recovered, but investigators found personal effects consistent with Mrs. Hartwell having been present during the incident. The fire had burned so intensely that forensic examination proved impossible. Sarah leaned over his shoulder, reading along. "They faked her death," she whispered. "The car accident was just the beginning. When that didn't work cleanly, they burned down part of their own house to cover their tracks." Marcus flipped through more documents. Bank records showed massive transfers from Elizabeth's accounts in the weeks leading up to her death, but the transfers were dated after the car accident. Someone had been moving her money while she was supposedly in a coma. "Look at this." Sarah pointed to a handwritten note tucked between the bank statements. The elegant script was definitely Elizabeth's. "If something happens to me, know that I discovered the truth about Father's business. The foundation is a front. The children's charity. God help me, there are no children. Only numbers on paper and money flowing to places it should never go." A chill ran down Marcus's spine. He'd stumbled onto something far worse than a simple murder for inheritance money. This was about covering up a massive fraud operation that had been masquerading as charity work for decades. The sound of a car engine outside made them both freeze. Marcus crept to the motel room's grimy window and peered through the blinds. A black sedan sat idling in the parking lot, its occupants invisible behind tinted glass. "We need to go. Now." Marcus began shoving papers back into the box, his movements frantic but careful not to damage anything. Each document was potential evidence, potential protection, or potential death warrant, depending on who got their hands on it first. Sarah was already grabbing their few belongings. "Where? We can't keep running forever." "The storage unit. We need to see if there's more." Marcus had been avoiding returning to where this all started, but Elizabeth's papers kept referencing the complete records being hidden somewhere safe. The storage unit was the most obvious place Gerald might have stashed additional evidence. They slipped out the back of the motel, using the dumpster area to avoid the front parking lot. Marcus's truck was parked 3 blocks away, a precaution that now seemed prescient. As they hurried through the alley, he caught a glimpse of 2 men in dark suits walking toward their former motel room. The drive back to the storage facility felt like it took hours instead of 20 minutes. Marcus kept checking his mirrors, taking random turns, doubling back. The black sedan didn't reappear, but that somehow made him more nervous rather than less. "What if Gerald hid something in the unit itself?" Sarah asked as they pulled into the storage facility. "Not just in the boxes, but actually built into the structure?" Marcus had been thinking the same thing. Gerald had been paranoid enough to keep Elizabeth's murder evidence for 30 years. He would have been meticulous about hiding the most damaging materials. The storage facility was nearly empty in the late afternoon heat. Their footsteps echoed off the concrete as they made their way to Unit 247. Marcus's key still worked. Apparently, whoever was tracking them hadn't thought to check here yet. Inside, the unit looked exactly as they'd left it days ago. Dust motes danced in the shaft of sunlight from the doorway, but now Marcus looked at the space with different eyes. The unit was larger than it needed to be for the furniture Gerald had stored here. The back wall seemed oddly positioned. Sarah was already examining the walls, running her hands along the metal seams. "Here," she called softly. "This panel isn't quite flush with the others." Marcus joined her, and together they worked at the loose panel. It came away easily, revealing a hollow space behind the wall. Inside, wrapped in plastic and duct tape, were 3 more boxes and what looked like a safe deposit box. The first box contained photographs. Not documents this time, but actual pictures of Elizabeth after her supposed death. She was thinner, her hair dyed dark but unmistakably alive. The photos showed her in what appeared to be a small apartment, sometimes with an older man Marcus didn't recognize. She survived the murder attempt. Sarah breathed. She was hiding. The timestamp on the photos showed dates spanning nearly 2 years after Elizabeth's official death. But then they stopped abruptly. The final photo showed Elizabeth looking frightened, glancing over her shoulder as if she knew someone was watching. Marcus opened the safe deposit box with growing dread. Inside was a death certificate, Elizabeth's real death certificate, dated 26 months after her supposed car accident. The cause of death was listed as gunshot wound to the head. They'd found her eventually. The payphone booth reeked of stale cigarettes and desperation. Marcus fed quarters into the slot with trembling fingers, each metallic clink echoing his racing heartbeat. He'd driven 20 minutes to find this relic, convinced his cell phone was being monitored. Paranoia had become his closest companion since finding the photographs. Riverside Journal, this is Kate speaking. I need to speak with someone about a cold case, something big. Marcus pressed his face closer to the grimy glass, scanning the parking lot for any sign of surveillance. Hold, please. I'll transfer you to our investigative desk. The hold music was interrupted by a gravelly voice. Jim Morrison here. What you got? Marcus had rehearsed this moment, but the words still caught in his throat. I have evidence about the Patricia Kellerman murder from 1987. Silence stretched between them before Morrison spoke, his tone suddenly sharp. Where did you say you were calling from? I didn't. Can we meet somewhere? I can't talk about this over the phone. The Kellerman case was closed years ago. Her husband confessed, remember? Died in prison in '98. He didn't kill her. Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead despite the October chill. I can prove it. Another pause. Riverside Diner on 5th Street. 1 hour. Come alone and bring whatever you think you have. I'll be wearing a blue baseball cap. The line went dead. Marcus stared at the receiver before hanging up, his mind already racing ahead to potential scenarios. Morrison could be legitimate, or he could be walking into a trap, but staying silent wasn't an option anymore, not after what he'd discovered in the negative Sarah developed. The diner was a throwback to the 1950s, all chrome and red vinyl booths. Marcus spotted Morrison immediately, a weathered man in his 60s, hunched over black coffee, the promised blue cap pulled low over suspicious eyes. Marcus slid into the opposite seat, clutching the manila envelope that contained his life's work from the past week. You look nervous, Morrison observed, studying Marcus with the intensity of someone accustomed to reading people's secrets. Wouldn't you be? Marcus signaled the waitress for coffee, needing something to do with his hands. Before I show you anything, I need to know, how well do you remember the Kellerman case? Morrison leaned back, his expression calculating. Well enough. Rich woman, found shot in her home. Husband claimed it was a robbery gone wrong, but evidence suggested otherwise. He eventually confessed to killing her for the insurance money. Case closed, justice served. Except Richard Kellerman was innocent. Marcus opened the envelope, his fingers hovering over the photographs. These were taken the night she died, by someone who was there. He slid the first photograph across the table. Morrison's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips as he stared at the image. Patricia Kellerman very much alive, laughing at something off-camera, timestamp showing 11:47 p.m. on the night she allegedly died at 10:30. Where did you get this? Morrison's voice had dropped to a whisper. Storage auction. Found a whole collection of them, along with other things. Marcus watched the reporter's face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition or deception. The person who took these photos was blackmailing someone. Patricia wasn't the first victim. Morrison set down his cup with shaking hands. You said there were others? Marcus revealed the second photograph. The politician's son from 1983, the congressman's wife from 1985, and finally the image that had made his blood run cold, Morrison himself, decades younger, accepting a briefcase from a man whose face was obscured by shadow. The reporter's face went white. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then help me understand. Marcus leaned forward, his voice urgent. Because someone already tried to break into my apartment, and I don't think they're going to stop. Morrison glanced around the diner nervously before focusing on the photograph of himself. That briefcase contained evidence that could have brought down half the city council. Evidence that disappeared before it could reach the right people. And you took money to make sure it stayed disappeared? I took money to stay alive. Morrison's admission hung between them like a loaded gun. Just like Patricia Kellerman took money to keep quiet about what she saw. Just like a dozen other people who thought they could profit from Vincent Carrera's secrets. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Vincent Carrera, the construction magnate whose empire had built half the city, whose political connections ran deeper than subway tunnels. Carrera had her killed. Morrison nodded grimly. And when her husband wouldn't confess, they made sure he had an accident in prison. Made it look like guilt drove him to suicide, but I knew better. He tapped the photograph. The person who took these pictures was playing with fire. If they're dead, you need to walk away now. If they're alive, God help them, because Carrera's people never give up. Marcus felt the walls of the diner closing in around him. The photographer's name was Danny Chen. He died in 1994. Apparent overdose. Morrison closed his eyes. Then you're holding a dead man's insurance policy. The question is, what are you going to do with it? The warehouse felt different in the pre-dawn darkness, shadows stretching like accusing fingers across the concrete floor. Marcus crouched behind a stack of cardboard boxes, his heart hammering against his ribs as footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. He'd been hiding here for 20 minutes, watching three figures systematically search through storage units with military precision. Detective Sarah Chen had been right about one thing: he was in over his head. The beam of a flashlight swept dangerously close to his position, and Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows. Through the gaps between boxes, he could make out the searchers, two men in dark clothing and a woman whose voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Unit 247, the woman said, consulting what appeared to be a tablet. "That's where our friend Marcus made his little discovery." Marcus's blood turned to ice. They knew about the storage unit. They knew his name, which meant they probably knew a lot more about him than he was comfortable with. "Should have handled this weeks ago," one of the men muttered, his voice rough with irritation. "Now we've got cops sniffing around, and God knows who else he's talked to." The woman's laugh was sharp and humorless. Richard Castellanos thought he was so clever, hiding evidence in a storage facility. Probably figured it would stay buried forever. She paused, and Marcus could hear the soft tap of her fingers on the tablet screen. He didn't count on defaulting on the rent. The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Richard Castellanos, the businessman whose disappearance had been front-page news 25 years ago. The case had gone cold, with rumors of embezzlement, organized crime connections, and a family that had fought bitterly over his estate. Now Marcus understood why the evidence in that storage unit was worth killing for. "The photographs?" the second man asked. "Still missing," the woman replied. "Along with the financial records. Our buyer is getting impatient." Marcus thought about the manila envelope hidden in his apartment, the one he'd been too afraid to fully examine. The photographs Detective Chen had shown him were disturbing enough. Crime scene images that suggested Richard Castellanos hadn't simply vanished. He'd been murdered, and someone had documented every detail. But apparently, those weren't the only photographs. The flashlight beam swung toward his hiding spot again, and this time Marcus knew he'd been spotted. The sudden silence that fell over the warehouse confirmed his worst fears. "Well, well," the woman's voice was closer now, almost conversational. "Mr. Marcus Rivera, you've been causing quite a bit of trouble lately." Marcus's mind raced through his options. The main exit was blocked by at least two of them. The emergency exit at the back of the building was 50 yards away through open space with no cover. His phone was in his pocket, but even if he could call for help, it would arrive too late. "I know what you're thinking," the woman continued, her footsteps methodical as she approached his position. "You're wondering if those photographs are worth dying for. Let me save you some time. They're not." Marcus slowly stood up, raising his hands. In the dim light filtering through the warehouse's grimy windows, He could finally see his pursuers clearly. The woman was in her 50s, professionally dressed despite the early hour, with the kind of cold eyes that suggested she'd done this before. The two men flanked her, both carrying guns with the casual familiarity of people who use them regularly. "The envelope," she said simply. "Where is it?" "What envelope?" Marcus tried to keep his voice steady, but even he could hear the tremor in it. The woman sighed, as if dealing with a particularly slow child. "Mr. Rivera, I'm going to explain something to you very clearly. 25 years ago, Richard Castellanos made some poor choices regarding certain business relationships. Those choices resulted in his death. Before he died, however, he managed to document some sensitive information." She took a step closer, and Marcus could smell her expensive perfume mixed with something else. Fear, maybe, or desperation. "That information has been safely contained for over 2 decades. But then you had to go and win that storage auction." Her smile was razor thin. Bad luck for everyone involved. Marcus's mind was working frantically now. These people had been searching for the evidence for 25 years. They'd probably killed Richard Castellanos to get it, and when that failed, they'd spent decades wondering where he'd hidden their secrets. "I can give you what you want," Marcus said carefully, "but I need guarantees." The woman laughed, and the sound echoed off the warehouse walls like breaking glass. "Oh, Mr. Rivera, you really don't understand your situation, do you?" Behind her, one of the men raised his gun. That's when Marcus heard the distant wail of sirens, growing louder by the second. The warehouse district felt different at night, shadows pooling between buildings like spilled ink. Marcus kept checking his rearview mirror as he drove toward the address Detective Chen had given him, watching for any sign of the black sedan that had been following him earlier. The meeting location, an abandoned textile factory, wasn't exactly inspiring confidence. His phone buzzed. Sarah's name lit up the screen. "Where are you?" Her voice was tight with worry. "Following up on something. I'll explain later." "Marcus, this is insane. You're not a cop. You're not qualified to handle whatever this is." She was right, but he was too deep now to turn back. "I know, but I have to see this through. Then I'm coming with you." "No." The word came out sharper than he intended. "Stay home. Stay safe. If something happens to me, you need to be able to tell people what we found." The line went quiet for a long moment. "I love you, you idiot. I love you too." He ended the call and pulled into the factory's empty parking lot. Only one other car waited there, a nondescript sedan that could have belonged to anyone. Detective Chen stepped out as Marcus approached, his movements careful and measured. "You came," Chen said, genuine surprise in his voice. "You said you had answers." Chen glanced around the empty lot before gesturing toward the factory's loading dock. "Let's walk. These walls have fewer ears." They moved into the shadows cast by the building's hulking frame. Chen's face was haggard in the dim light, years of wear etched deep around his eyes. 23 years ago, I was a rookie detective," Chen began, "fresh out of the academy, eager to make a difference. The Whitman case was my first major investigation." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "You worked Elizabeth Whitman's murder?" "Worked it? I lived it. For months it consumed everything. A young woman, wealthy family, no obvious enemies. Then suddenly we had our suspect, Tommy Rodriguez, a maintenance worker at her apartment building. But you didn't believe he did it." Chen's laugh was bitter. Belief had nothing to do with it. The evidence was there. His prints on a glass in her apartment, neighbors who saw him in the hallway that night. But something felt wrong. The timeline didn't add up, and Rodriguez had an alibi that my partner refused to investigate properly. "Your partner?" "Detective Bill Morrison. 15 years on the force, connections throughout the department. He was supposed to mentor me, show me the ropes." Chen's hands clenched into fists. What he showed me was how justice could be bought and sold. Marcus thought about the photographs he'd found, the discrepancies in the police reports. Morrison was dirty. Morrison was a lot of things. But he's been dead for 12 years, so I can't ask him why he buried evidence or who paid him to do it. A car door slammed somewhere in the distance, the sound echoing off empty buildings. Both men froze, listening, but no other sounds followed. "The storage unit," Marcus said. "How does it connect?" 3 months after Rodriguez was convicted, I got a tip. Anonymous call saying there was evidence hidden in a storage facility. I investigated on my own time, but the unit was already cleaned out, empty except for some dust and old newspapers. Unit 247? Chen nodded. I always suspected Morrison had been there first, but I could never prove it, and eventually I had to let it go. Career suicide to keep pushing when everyone wanted the case closed. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed Chen one of the photographs. Morrison shaking hands with a well-dressed man outside a restaurant. "Recognize him?" Chen squinted at the screen, then his face went pale. "Jesus Christ, that's Raymond Carlyle." "Who's Raymond Carlyle?" "Elizabeth Whitman's uncle. He inherited her father's construction empire when the old man died. Carlyle Development has been building half this city for the past 2 decades. The pieces were falling into place, forming a picture Marcus wished he couldn't see. So Carlyle pays Morrison to frame Rodriguez for his niece's murder. But why kill her in the first place? Money. It's always money with these people. Elizabeth was set to inherit a controlling stake in the company on her 25th birthday. She'd been making noise about cleaning house, bringing in outside auditors. Chen's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. If she'd lived another month, she would have discovered what her uncle was stealing. A new sound cut through the night, multiple car engines getting closer. Chen grabbed Marcus's arm. "We need to move. Now. What about the evidence you found? It's enough to reopen the case, but only if we live long enough to present it." Chen was already heading toward his car. "Follow me. Stay close, and whatever you do, don't go home tonight." Marcus ran for his own vehicle, his heart hammering against his ribs. Behind them, headlights swept across the factory parking lot like searchlights hunting prey. The abandoned warehouse stood like a monument to forgotten industry, its broken windows catching the last rays of sunlight as Marcus pulled into the gravel lot. His hands trembled against the steering wheel, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on him like a physical force. The storage unit's secrets had led him here, to this moment where everything would finally come to light. Detective Sarah Chen's unmarked car was already parked near the loading dock, just as they'd arranged. Marcus had wrestled with the decision to trust her for days, but the escalating threats and near-miss encounters had left him no choice. If he was going to survive this, he needed someone in law enforcement on his side. He grabbed the manila envelope from the passenger seat, copies of everything he'd found, organized chronologically. The photographs, the financial records, the correspondence that painted a picture of corruption so deep it reached into the highest levels of city government. Original documents were safely stored in 3 separate locations, his insurance policy against anyone who might want to silence him permanently. Chen emerged from her car as he approached, her expression grim. "You sure about this location? Seems awfully exposed." "That's exactly why I chose it," Marcus replied. "Hard to make someone disappear when you're out in the open like this." She studied him with sharp eyes. "You look like hell. Sleeping with one eye open will do that to you." He handed her the envelope. "Everything's in there. Names, dates, bank transfers, enough to put away half the city council and 3 sitting judges." Chen whistled low as she flipped through the documents. "Where did you say you got this?" "Storage auction. Unit 247 at Riverside Self-Storage. Belonged to someone named Eleanor Vasquez. Never heard of her." "That's because she's been dead for 23 years. Officially ruled a suicide, but these papers tell a different story." Marcus pointed to a particular photograph. "That's her with Councilman Hartwell 3 weeks before she died. The same Councilman Hartwell who was supposedly investigating irregularities in the waterfront development contracts." Chen's face darkened as she continued reading. "Jesus, this goes back decades. The harbor project, the downtown revitalization, even the new stadium deal." She looked up at him. "Do you understand what you've stumbled into? This isn't just about one murder anymore. This is about millions of dollars and careers that span generations." A black sedan pulled into the lot, moving slowly across the gravel. Marcus felt his pulse quicken, but Chen placed a calming hand on his arm. "That's my backup," she said. "I told you this was too big to handle alone." But something in her tone made him look at her more carefully. The slight tension around her eyes, the way her hand had moved closer to her service weapon. The sedan stopped 30 feet away, and 2 men in expensive suits got out. "Those aren't cops," Marcus said quietly. Chen's expression shifted, and suddenly the gun was in her hand, pointed at his chest. "No, they're not." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Chen hadn't been investigating the corruption, she'd been protecting it. "How long have you been on their payroll?" "Long enough to know that some secrets are worth keeping buried." Her voice was steady, professional. "Eleanor Vasquez was a problem that got solved a long time ago. We're not going to let her cause trouble from the grave." Marcus felt the familiar weight of the recording device in his jacket pocket, still running from their conversation. At least, some of the truth would survive, even if he didn't. "The originals," Chen continued. "Where are they?" "Safe. And if I don't check in with my lawyer by 9 tonight, they go straight to the FBI field office in Sacramento." One of the suited men approached, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. Marcus recognized him from the photographs, older now, grayer, but unmistakably the same face that had appeared in dozens of compromising pictures with Eleanor Vasquez. "Mr. Torres," the man said, his voice cultured and calm. "I'm Thomas Hartwell. I believe you have something that belongs to me. Murder evidence doesn't belong to anyone except the victim." Hartwell smiled coldly. Eleanor was unstable. She made accusations she couldn't prove about things she didn't understand. "We tried to help her, but sometimes people make unfortunate choices, like jumping off a bridge, like getting involved in situations that are too complex for civilian oversight." Chen kept the gun trained on Marcus while Hartwell circled him slowly, predator-like. The second man had moved to block the path back to Marcus's car. "Here's what's going to happen," Hartwell continued. "You're going to retrieve those original documents and hand them over. In exchange, you walk away from this with enough money to start over somewhere far from here. And if I refuse, then you join Eleanor in solving the city's problems through permanent silence." Marcus looked around the empty lot, calculating distances and angles. The warehouse behind them had multiple entrances, and the approaching darkness might provide some cover. But first, he needed to buy time and gather more evidence. "I'll need guarantees," he said. "Proof that you'll honor the deal." Hartwell's smile widened. "Of course, we're reasonable people." The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like stepping into a tomb. Marcus's footsteps echoed against concrete walls as he followed Detective Sarah Chen through the maze of rusted machinery and forgotten industrial equipment. The beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing decades of decay and neglect. "You sure about this location?" Sarah whispered, her hand resting on her service weapon. Marcus checked the coordinates on his phone again, cross-referencing them with the cryptic notes he'd found in Victoria Ashford's storage unit. "This is it. The numbers match perfectly." They moved deeper into the warehouse, past conveyor belts frozen in time and skeletal remains of assembly lines. The air tasted of rust and abandonment, heavy with the weight of secrets that had festered in darkness for 30 years. Sarah's flashlight swept across a section of the floor where the concrete looked different, newer somehow. "Here," she said, kneeling down. "See how this area was repoured? The color's slightly off and the texture doesn't match." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. After weeks of running, hiding, and piecing together fragments of the truth, they might finally have found what everyone was willing to kill for. The real evidence. The proof that would either vindicate him or destroy him completely. "We need a crew," Sarah said, standing up and dusting off her knees. "Ground-penetrating radar, excavation equipment. I can't authorize this without—" The sound of footsteps on gravel outside cut her short. Multiple vehicles, engines shutting off in careful succession. Sarah's training kicked in immediately, and she switched off her flashlight, plunging them into absolute darkness. "Back exit," Marcus breathed. "There isn't one." The warehouse's main entrance groaned open, and powerful LED beams swept the interior like searchlights. Marcus counted at least 4 separate light sources, which meant 4 armed men minimum. His stomach dropped as he recognized one of the voices directing the search. Vincent Ashford, Victoria's younger brother, the one who'd inherited the family empire when their father died, the one who'd been hunting Marcus since this nightmare began. "I know you're in here, Marcus," Vincent's voice carried across the empty space with predatory confidence. "You've led us quite a chase, but it ends tonight." Sarah drew her weapon and pressed her back against a massive piece of machinery, pulling Marcus beside her. She held up 3 fingers, then 2, then 1, a countdown to something Marcus didn't understand until she threw her flashlight across the warehouse. It clattered against the far wall, drawing immediate gunfire and shouted commands. In the chaos, she grabbed Marcus's hand and led him through the shadows, using the sound of their pursuers' movements to navigate away from danger. They crouched behind a series of metal drums, listening to Vincent's men spread out through the warehouse. "The concrete section," Vincent called out. "That's what they came for. Secure the perimeter and start setting charges." Charges. Marcus's blood ran cold. They weren't just here to kill him and Sarah, they were here to destroy the evidence permanently. Whatever lay beneath that concrete floor would be vaporized along with everything else in this warehouse. Sarah leaned close to his ear. "When I move, you run for the loading dock. There's an office there with a phone. Call for backup. I'm not leaving you. You have to. Without you, none of this matters. The storage unit, the photographs, the documents, you're the only one who can tie it all together." Before Marcus could protest, Sarah was moving, her training evident in every step as she flanked Vincent's position. The first gunshot shattered the warehouse's oppressive silence, followed immediately by shouts and running footsteps. Marcus forced himself to move, staying low as he navigated toward the loading dock. Behind him, the firefight intensified, muzzle flashes illuminating the warehouse interior like deadly lightning. He reached the office and frantically searched for a phone, his hands shaking as he dialed 911. "Officer down. Officer needs assistance," he gasped when the dispatcher answered. "Abandoned Morrison Steel Warehouse, Industrial Boulevard. Multiple armed suspects, explosives on scene." Through the office's grimy window, Marcus watched Vincent himself appear in his line of sight, weapon drawn, scanning the shadows where Sarah had taken cover. The man moved with military precision, nothing like the soft businessman Marcus had imagined from old newspaper photos. A new sound cut through the gunfire, sirens in the distance, growing closer. Vincent heard them too, barking orders to his men about accelerating their timeline. Marcus saw one of them placing what looked like plastic explosives near the concrete section they'd identified. The sirens were getting closer, but not close enough. In minutes, this warehouse would be nothing but rubble and flame, taking with it the last evidence of a 30-year-old murder and any chance Marcus had of clearing his name. He looked around the office desperately, searching for something, anything that could help. His eyes fell on an old emergency axe mounted beside the fire extinguisher. Not much of a weapon, but it would have to do. The time for hiding was over. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like stepping into a tomb. Marcus's footsteps echoed against concrete walls as he followed Detective Sarah Chen deeper into the shadows, both of them armed with flashlights that carved weak circles of light through the dusty air. The smell of rust and decay hung heavy around them. "You sure about this location?" Chen whispered, her service weapon drawn but lowered. Marcus consulted the cryptic map he'd found hidden in the storage unit's false bottom, the final piece of evidence that had led them here. According to this, Vincent Castellano's body should be somewhere in the back section, near what looks like an old loading dock. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus first opened that storage unit, and every day had brought him closer to either salvation or destruction. The evidence he'd uncovered painted a clear picture. Vincent Castellano, a wealthy businessman who'd supposedly fled the country in 1987, had actually been murdered by his business partner, Robert Henley. Henley had staged the disappearance, taken control of their real estate empire, and become one of the city's most powerful men. The warehouse belonged to one of Henley's shell companies, abandoned for over 30 years. If Marcus was right, they'd find more than just Vincent's remains. They'd find the proof needed to bring down a man who'd built his fortune on murder. "There," Marcus said, pointing his flashlight toward a section of concrete floor that looked different from the rest, newer, hastily poured. Chen knelt beside the suspicious area, running her fingers along the edges where old concrete met new. "This definitely looks like someone broke up the original floor and repoured it." She stood, brushing dust from her knees. "But we'll need a warrant and a full forensics team to—" The distant sound of car doors slamming cut her off, then voices growing closer. "Shit," Chen breathed. "We need to leave, now." But it was too late. Footsteps approached from multiple directions, and the beam of powerful flashlights swept through the warehouse entrance. Marcus recognized the commanding voice that echoed off the walls immediately. "I know you're in here, Mr. Torres. You've been quite the persistent treasure hunter, haven't you?" Robert Henley stepped into view, flanked by two men who definitely weren't security guards. Even in the dim light, Marcus could see the cold calculation in Henley's eyes, the same look he'd probably worn 35 years ago when he'd killed his business partner. "Mr. Henley," Chen said, stepping forward with her badge visible. "Detective Chen, Metro PD. I'm going to need you and your associates to—" "To what, detective?" "Leave my own property." Henley's smile was razor thin. "I think not, especially when there are trespassers disturbing a crime scene." "So you admit there's a crime scene here?" Marcus found his voice, surprised by how steady it sounded despite the terror coursing through him. Henley laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. Vincent always was careless with his record-keeping. "I thought I'd found everything, but apparently he hid some insurance policies even I didn't know about." His expression hardened. "You've cost me quite a bit of trouble, Mr. Torres, and Detective Chen here has made some very inconvenient inquiries." Chen's weapon was rising, but one of Henley's men was faster. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space. Chen cried out and stumbled, clutching her shoulder as her gun clattered across the concrete. "Sarah!" Marcus lunged toward her, but the second gunman stepped forward, weapon trained on his chest. "Vincent thought he was so clever," Henley continued conversationally, as if he hadn't just ordered someone shot. "Threatening to expose our creative accounting practices unless I gave him a larger share of the profits. He never understood that some partnerships can only be dissolved permanently." Marcus pressed his hands against Chen's shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. She was conscious but pale, her breathing shallow. "You won't get away with this," he said. "Too many people know where we are." "Do they?" Henley pulled out his phone. "Because Detective Chen told her captain she was following up on a cold case tip. Alone. Very dedicated of her, really. And you, Mr. Torres, well, you've been acting quite erratically since your storage unit discovery. The stress of sudden wealth can do terrible things to a person's judgment." Marcus realized with growing horror that Henley had been watching them, planning this. The warehouse wasn't just Vincent's tomb, it was going to be theirs too. "The beautiful irony," Henley said, checking his expensive watch, "is that Vincent's body will finally have some company after all these lonely years." He nodded to his men. "Make it look like they came here together. A murder-suicide would be poetic, don't you think?" As the gunman stepped closer, Marcus's mind raced desperately through options that all led to the same conclusion. He was about to join the very victim whose story he'd tried to tell. The warehouse felt like a tomb as Marcus crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, his heart hammering against his ribs. Detective Chen's flashlight beam swept past his hiding spot, missing him by inches. The evidence box, containing the photographs, documents, and DNA samples that could bring down Senator Richardson, sat heavy in his backpack. "I know you're here, Marcus," Chen called out, her voice echoing off the concrete walls. "There's nowhere left to run." Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows, trying to control his breathing. Through the gaps between containers, he could see Chen moving methodically through the warehouse, her service weapon drawn. Behind her, two figures emerged from the darkness. Richardson's men, the same ones who had killed Elena Vasquez 30 years ago. His phone buzzed softly. A text from Sarah, FBI is 10 minutes out. Stay hidden. 10 minutes might as well be 10 hours. Chen was getting closer, and Marcus could hear the heavy footsteps of Richardson's enforcers spreading out to flank him. The irony wasn't lost on him. After everything he'd been through, after uncovering the truth about Elena's murder and Richardson's rise to power built on her corpse, he was about to become another casualty. A metallic clang echoed through the warehouse as someone kicked over an empty paint can. Marcus seized the moment, sprinting toward the far end of the building where a loading dock offered his only chance of escape. His footsteps rang out like gunshots in the silence. There! Chen's shout was followed immediately by the crack of gunfire. Marcus dove behind a forklift as bullets sparked off metal around him. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air. He fumbled for his phone, fingers trembling as he speed-dialed the number Sarah had given him. Agent Morrison, the voice answered immediately. This is Marcus Webb. I'm trapped in the Riverside Industrial Warehouse. Chen's dirty. She's working with Richardson. I have the evidence, but... Another volley of gunshots cut him off. The phone flew from his hand, shattering against the concrete floor. "Give us the box, Marcus, and this ends cleanly," called out one of Richardson's men. Marcus recognized the gravelly voice from the storage unit confrontation. "Make this difficult, and you'll end up like the Vasquez woman." Rage flared in Marcus's chest. Elena Vasquez had been 23 years old when they killed her, her whole life ahead of her. Her only crime had been witnessing Richardson's illegal arms deals that funded his early political campaigns. She'd tried to do the right thing, and they'd silenced her forever. Marcus checked the evidence box one more time. Inside were the photographs Elena had taken of Richardson meeting with arms dealers, bank records showing suspicious payments, and most damning of all, the DNA evidence from her murder scene that had never been properly processed. It was enough to destroy Richardson and expose the corruption that reached all the way into the police department. The sound of approaching sirens began to filter through the warehouse walls, still distant but growing stronger. Chen must have heard them too, because her voice took on a note of urgency. "We're out of time," she hissed to her companions. "Find him now." Marcus made his decision. He couldn't wait for the cavalry. There was no guarantee the arriving officers weren't also compromised. He had to get the evidence out himself. He pulled out the portable scanner Sarah had given him and began photographing the most crucial documents, uploading them directly to the cloud servers of 3 major news organizations. Even if they killed him, the truth would survive. The footsteps were getting closer. Marcus could see Chen's shadow moving along the opposite wall, while the 2 enforcers approached from different angles. They had him boxed in. As he uploaded the final photograph, Marcus noticed a maintenance ladder leading up to a skylight 20 feet above. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all he had left. He broke from cover, sprinting toward the ladder as gunfire erupted behind him. A bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him around, but adrenaline kept him moving. His hands found the ladder rungs, and he hauled himself upward as fast as his injured arm would allow. "He's going for the roof!" Chen shouted. More bullets sparked off the metal ladder, but Marcus was already halfway up. The skylight was old and corroded. He prayed it would give way. Behind him, he could hear someone else climbing the ladder. The sirens were much closer now, and through the grimy skylight, Marcus could see the flashing red and blue lights painting the night sky. But would they arrive in time? His hand reached the skylight mechanism just as Chen's flashlight beam found him. Her gun was trained on his back, and at this range she wouldn't miss. "End of the line, Marcus," she said, breathing hard from the climb. "Drop the bag and come down slowly." Marcus looked down at her, then at the evidence box that had cost so many people their lives. The sirens were almost at the warehouse now. "You're right," he said quietly. "It is the end of the line." The warehouse felt different in the pre-dawn darkness. Marcus crouched behind a stack of pallets, his heart hammering against his ribs as footsteps echoed through the cavernous space. Detective Rivera had positioned herself near the main entrance, while backup units surrounded the building. Everything depended on Vincent Carrera taking the bait. The storage unit sat open like a mouth revealing its secrets. Marcus had carefully arranged the evidence exactly as they'd discussed. The bloody shirt draped over a chair, the photographs scattered across a makeshift table, and the ledger positioned where the amber security lights would illuminate its damning pages. To anyone entering, it would look like Marcus had been examining his $50 treasure trove, piecing together the truth about the Castellano murder. A car door slammed in the distance. Marcus checked his phone. 4:47 a.m., right on schedule. The side entrance creaked open, and a figure moved through the shadows with practiced stealth. Vincent Carrera emerged into the light, his expensive suit replaced by dark clothing, his usual composed demeanor replaced by something predatory and desperate. In his right hand, a pistol caught the fluorescent glare. Marcus held his breath as Vincent approached the storage unit. The man, who'd built an empire on his father's blood money, moved like a ghost, but his eyes burned with the intensity of someone who'd spent 30 years waiting for this moment, the moment when his carefully constructed life might crumble. "I know you're here," Vincent called softly, his voice carrying an eerie calm. Marcus, isn't it? The lucky bidder who bought more than he bargained for. The acoustics of the warehouse made it impossible to pinpoint exactly where Vincent stood, but Marcus could hear him moving closer to the unit. Papers rustled as Vincent examined the evidence. "Fascinating collection," Vincent continued, his tone conversational despite the circumstances. "My father was always meticulous about documentation, a habit that served him well in business, less so in murder." Marcus pressed himself deeper into the shadows, grateful for Rivera's insistence on the wire. Every word was being recorded, every confession preserved for the justice that had been delayed 3 decades. "You know what's interesting about storage auctions?" Vincent's voice had moved. He was inside the unit now, among the evidence that could destroy him. People assume forgotten things have no value, but sometimes the most dangerous treasures are the ones that disappear. A photograph fluttered to the ground, Sarah Castellano's face catching the light one last time. Marcus remembered staring at that image for hours, wondering about the woman whose death had been buried beneath layers of corruption and fear. She was beautiful, wasn't she? Vincent's voice carried a note of genuine sadness. Sarah. My father became obsessed with her, convinced that she was going to expose his money laundering operation. He couldn't let that happen. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Marcus felt a mixture of triumph and terror. They had him, but Vincent was still armed and increasingly unstable. "I was 22 when I helped him dispose of the body," Vincent continued. "Old enough to know better, young enough to believe I had no choice. Funny how choices define us, isn't it, Marcus?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of ventilation systems and the occasional creak of metal settling in the cold. "I spent years building something legitimate from his bloody foundation," Vincent said. "Charitable organizations, community development, scholarships for underprivileged kids. I convinced myself that the good I was doing somehow balanced the scales." Marcus heard footsteps moving toward his hiding spot. His mouth went dry as he realized Vincent was no longer content to monologue from a distance. "But you can't build a clean life on dirty money, can you? The foundation is always rotten, no matter how beautiful the structure above it." A pallet shifted nearby. Vincent was close now, close enough that Marcus could hear his breathing. "I could kill you," Vincent said quietly. "Make this whole problem disappear. But I'm tired, Marcus. 30 years of looking over my shoulder, 30 years of jumping every time the phone rings, 30 years of wondering when the past would catch up." Marcus's phone buzzed once, Rivera's signal. Backup was moving into position. "The irony is perfect, really," Vincent continued. $50. That's what you paid for my father's sins. I've spent millions trying to bury them. The warehouse suddenly flooded with light as police units surrounded the building. Vincent laughed, a sound devoid of humor but filled with something that might have been relief. "There it is," he said. "The reckoning I've been waiting for." Marcus heard the pistol clatter to the concrete floor, followed by Vincent's voice, clear and resigned. "I surrender." As Detective Rivera's commands echoed through the warehouse, Marcus finally exhaled. The $50 gamble that had started with hopes of forgotten furniture had ended with justice for a woman who'd been silent for too long. The storage auction was finally over.